For most of his life, John Miller believed his story was already written, a quiet, solitary final chapter that would play out in the small, empty house he called home. At 70 years old, John was a man of habit and few words, a war veteran whose days were measured by routine and silence. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. And it all started with the distant rumble of motorcycle engines. John had spent decades alone, haunted by memories he rarely spoke of. He was a decorated veteran, having served with courage and honor, but the return to civilian life had not been easy. Friends drifted away, family members grew distant, and John, unwilling or unable to bridge the gap between his past and the present, gradually withdrew into himself. His home, tucked on the outskirts of town, was a reflection of his world, quiet, orderly, and heavy with the weight of memories. Photographs of younger days lined the shelves, smiling faces of comrades who never made it home, moments frozen in time. The only sound that regularly filled his space was the low hum of the radio, often tuned to static-filled news reports or classic country music. The neighbors knew him as polite but distant. He'd nod a greeting, sometimes exchange a few words, but never linger long enough for a real conversation. Most days, John could be found sitting on his porch, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching the world go by without expecting much from it. But deep down, beneath the layers of solitude and stoicism, there was a quiet ache, a longing for connection, though John would never have admitted it out loud. And then came the day that everything changed. It was a late summer afternoon when John first noticed them, a group of bikers roaring down Main Street, their leather jackets glinting in the sun, laughter and shouts echoing as they pulled into the local diner. John watched from a distance, his eyes narrowing with curiosity and, if he were honest, a touch of skepticism. These weren't the kind of people he usually crossed paths with. To him, they seemed loud, rough around the edges, a sharp contrast to his own measured quiet. But there was something about them that lingered in his mind long after they had left. The easy camaraderie, the way they slapped each other's backs, sharing stories and laughter like family. John found himself wondering what it would feel like to belong to a group like that, to have people who looked out for you, no matter what. He shook the thought away quickly. That wasn't his world. Not anymore. Or so he thought. What John didn't know was that this seemingly random encounter would spark a chain of events that would upend his quiet existence and change his life in ways he could never have predicted. How did a lonely veteran, resigned to spend his final years in solitude, end up finding brotherhood, adventure, and a new sense of purpose among a group of unexpected friends? If you're still here, feel free to subscribe, because John's incredible story is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss where this road leads next. John Miller's world was one of quiet endurance. After returning from war in his late 20s, he had hoped, like many veterans, that life would fall back into place. But instead of healing, he found himself adrift, burdened with memories that refused to fade and emotions too tangled to untie. His hometown, once familiar and comforting, felt distant now. Old friends had moved on, gotten married, built lives that seemed untouched by the weight he carried. John, in contrast, struggled to fit into the rhythm of civilian life. Jobs came and went. Conversations felt hollow. And with each passing year, he retreated further into himself. By the time he turned 70, John's days followed an almost mechanical pattern. He woke up early, made a simple breakfast, and spent hours tinkering in his garage, fixing old tools or working on his beloved, though rarely used, pickup truck. In the afternoons, he'd take long, aimless walks through town, nodding politely to passers-by, but rarely stopping to chat. The evenings were spent in his worn recliner, a blanket over his knees and a dog-eared book in his lap, even if he barely read a page. His small house was impeccably tidy, but it felt more like a shelter than a home. The walls were lined with military memorabilia, medals, framed flags, and black and white photos of young men in uniform, faces that still visited him in dreams. A large American flag fluttered on the porch, a silent testament to his service, but also, in some ways, a barrier between himself and the rest of the world. John's only real companion was his German shepherd, Duke, a loyal friend who rarely left his side. The two shared a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. Duke was the reason John got out of bed on the hardest days and the comfort he turned to when memories became too heavy. Though John wouldn't have described himself as unhappy, there was an unmistakable emptiness that hung over his life. Every once in a while, especially during long winter nights, he'd catch himself staring out the window, watching the snow fall, and wonder if this was all there was left for him, a slow, quiet fade into the background. He had long since stopped expecting anything new. The idea of friendship, of belonging somewhere, felt like something that belonged to another life, another version of himself he could barely remember. And yet, beneath all the layers of routine and resignation, a small part of John's heart still hoped for something more, even if he couldn't quite name it. What he didn't realize then was that life had one more unexpected twist waiting for him. And it would arrive not with quiet words, but with the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines rolling down Main Street. It was a late Saturday morning, the kind when the town square buzzed with the usual small-town hum. Shopkeepers setting out fresh displays, neighbors chatting over coffee, and the occasional dog barking in the distance. John Miller had just finished his grocery run and was walking Duke back toward his truck when a deep, thunderous rumble filled the air. He turned his head and squinted down the road. A line of motorcycles, gleaming chrome and powerful engines, rolled slowly into view, their riders wearing leather jackets, bandanas, and mirrored sunglasses. There must have been at least 15 of them, riding in perfect formation, their presence impossible to ignore. Children pointed excitedly. Shop doors opened as curious faces peeked out to watch. John stood still, Duke shifting restlessly at his side, ears perked up at the unfamiliar noise. The bikers pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, their engines growling low before one by one they cut the ignition. The sudden quiet seemed even louder than the roar that had preceded it. Laughter and banter quickly replaced the noise of engines as the group dismounted, slapping each other's backs, stretching their legs, and heading inside. John couldn't help but watch from across the street. There was something magnetic about them, a mix of rugged toughness and easy camaraderie that stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Yet, at the same time, a familiar skepticism crept in. His military instincts, honed by years of discipline and caution, made him wary of groups like this. Too loud, too wild, he thought. Not his kind of people. Still, he didn't move. He stood there, gripping Duke's leash a little tighter, eyes locked on the scene unfolding in front of him. As if sensing his gaze, one of the bikers, a tall man with a gray beard and kind eyes, looked over and gave John a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but it caught John off guard. He nodded back stiffly, then turned away, feeling unexpectedly self-conscious. For the rest of the afternoon, John found himself distracted. Back home, as he unpacked groceries and refilled Duke's water bowl, his mind kept drifting to the sight of those motorcycles lined up in a perfect row, their riders laughing together like old friends who'd known each other forever. That night, as he sat on the porch with Duke, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the memory of that biker's nod replayed in his mind. It was such a small thing, but it left a mark. He didn't know it yet, but that brief moment, just a simple meeting of eyes and a nod, was the first crack in the wall of solitude John had built around himself. And sometimes, all it takes is a crack to let something new in. Over the next few weeks, John couldn't help but notice the bikers popping up around town more often. Rosie's Diner, the little hardware store, even the gas station by the edge of town, they seemed to make regular stops during their weekend rides. Every time John saw them, he'd feel a familiar tug of curiosity, but he kept his distance, observing quietly from the sidelines. One Saturday afternoon, as John was filling up his truck at the gas station, he heard the now familiar rumble behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Sure enough, a convoy of motorcycles rolled in, parking at the pumps and lining up under the overhang. John focused on his nozzle, hoping to finish up quickly when a voice called out, "Hey there, soldier." He looked up, surprised to see the same gray-bearded biker from before approaching with an easy smile. The patch on his jacket read Mac. John stiffened instinctively but gave a polite nod. "Noticed your Vietnam vet sticker," Mac said, gesturing toward the back window of John's truck. "I served too. Desert Storm." John relaxed just a little. "That's so?" "Yeah," Mac replied, sticking out his hand. "Name's Mac. And you?" "John," he answered, gripping Mac's hand firmly. There was a brief silence, one of those moments where two men sized each other up and, in an unspoken way, measured respect. "You ride?" Mac asked, motioning to John's truck but clearly meaning motorcycles. "Used to, a long time ago," John admitted, surprising even himself by saying it out loud. Mac's eyes lit up. "No kidding? Well, we've got a group ride next weekend. Nothing fancy, just a bunch of old-timers like me blowing the dust off the pipes. You should come by, man. We always have room for one more." John blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to politely decline, but Mac cut in with a grin. "No pressure. Just think about it." With a nod and a clap on John's shoulder, Mac turned back to his crew, leaving John standing there, feeling unexpectedly rattled. All the way home, his mind spun. Ride with them? At his age? It felt absurd. He barely talked to people anymore, let alone jumped into something like that. And yet, a part of him couldn't stop thinking about it. The invitation felt sincere, and something about Mac's easy friendliness stayed with him. For the rest of the week, John found himself glancing at the calendar more than usual. Every time he told himself it was a ridiculous idea, some small, stubborn voice inside whispered, "What if it's not?" By Friday night, as he sat on his porch sipping coffee under the stars, John caught himself wondering what it would be like to hear the wind rush past again, to feel the engine rumble beneath him. It had been so long since he'd felt anything like that, and even longer since he'd felt like he belonged somewhere. He shook his head, chuckling softly to himself. "Not me," he muttered. "Not anymore." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that seemed made for long drives and fresh air. John woke early, same as always, but this time his routine felt different. His eyes kept drifting toward the garage, where, beneath a dusty tarp, his old motorcycle sat waiting, untouched for nearly 20 years. For hours, he wrestled with indecision. Logic told him to forget it, to stick to his quiet habits, and let the invitation fade. But something else, a quiet, insistent tug, refused to let go. By noon, after pacing the living room and finishing 2 cups of coffee, John made his decision. He grabbed the tarp and pulled it free, revealing his 1980s Harley-Davidson, coated in dust but still solid, still beautiful. His fingers traced the worn leather seat as memories flooded back, of long rides through the countryside, the hum of the engine, the wind against his face. John spent the next hour checking the basics: oil, tires, battery. It took a bit of coaxing, but when the engine finally roared to life, the familiar sound sent a shiver through him. Duke barked excitedly from the porch, as if sensing something new was happening. By the time he rolled into Rosie's diner parking lot, the group was already gathering. Engines idled, laughter rang out, and the smell of leather and gasoline filled the air. John parked a little on the outskirts, unsure if he was really ready for this. Max spotted him first. "Well, look who decided to show up," he hollered, waving him over. John felt a mix of nerves and pride as he walked toward the group, helmet in hand. The bikers greeted him with warm handshakes and back slaps, introducing themselves one by one. Names like Tank, Rusty, and Big Joe. Despite their rugged appearances, every handshake was firm, every smile genuine. "We're just about to head out," Max said. "It's an easy ride, few hours out to the lake and back. You up for it?" John hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm up for it." As they lined up and hit the road, John's nerves buzzed. But the moment his bike roared to life and the wheels hit the asphalt, something shifted. The years seemed to melt away, and he found himself grinning despite himself. The rhythm of the ride, the roar of engines, the camaraderie in the way the group moved as one, it was exhilarating. They rode through winding country roads, past golden fields, and under towering trees painted with autumn colors. Every now and then, Mac or another rider would give him a thumbs up, and John would return it, feeling a growing sense of belonging. By the time they pulled into a rest stop near the lake, John's face ached from smiling. As they gathered around for water and snacks, Mac clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Not bad for a first ride back, huh?" John chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't realize how much I missed this." And in that moment, surrounded by his new companions, John felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The walls he'd built around his heart for so long had started to crack, letting in laughter, friendship, and the healing power of the open road. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a brand new chapter. In the weeks that followed that first ride, John found himself doing something he hadn't done in years: checking his calendar for upcoming events, marking down ride dates, and even looking forward to weekends. What had started as a tentative step into unfamiliar territory was quickly becoming a central part of his routine, and, more importantly, his heart. The biker group welcomed him in like he'd always been there. Every Saturday ride felt like an adventure, a break from the quiet monotony that had defined his life for so long. John was surprised by how naturally the friendship grew. It wasn't just about riding. It was the pit stops, the campfire talks, the moments of shared silence on long stretches of road that deepened their connection. One crisp October afternoon, the group rode out to a scenic overlook, the sun setting behind rolling hills bathed in gold and crimson. As they sat around a fire pit, swapping stories and passing around mugs of hot coffee, Mac turned to John and asked, "So what's your story, man? What brought you here?" John hesitated. He'd kept his guard up for so long. His instinct was to deflect or shrug it off. But looking around at the faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, faces that had become familiar, kind, and non-judgmental, he felt something loosen inside him. "I served in Vietnam," John began slowly, his voice steady but low. "Came home with a lot of baggage. Never really shook it off. Life just got quieter and quieter over the years." The group listened without interruption, their eyes respectful and understanding. A few nodded knowingly, veterans themselves who understood the unspoken weight of war. "It's been a long time since I felt like I fit anywhere," John added, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Until now." Mac leaned back, smiling. "You fit just fine here, brother. We've all got our scars, some you see, some you don't. But out here, we've got each other's backs. Always." The words sank deep, settling into a place inside John that had felt hollow for years. As fall gave way to winter, the group continued to meet regularly. When weather kept them off the bikes, they'd gather at Rosie's for coffee or at one of their garages to tinker with engines and swap stories. John found himself laughing more, opening up in ways he never expected. Slowly, piece by piece, the walls he'd built around himself crumbled. One evening, after a particularly long ride, John sat with Mac watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mac clapped him on the back and said, "You know, it's good having you around, John. You bring something steady to the group." John smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "Funny, I feel like you guys are the ones holding me up." And in that quiet moment, John realized something profound. He hadn't just found a group of riding buddies. He'd found a new kind of family. A family forged not by blood, but by loyalty, shared experiences, and the simple, powerful truth that sometimes the road brings you exactly where you need to be. Winter settled over the town with a heavy, quiet presence. The roads grew icy, and the bikes stayed tucked away in garages, waiting for spring. But even though the engines had gone silent, the bond between John and the group only deepened. One particularly harsh February morning, John woke feeling off. At first, he chalked it up to the cold, but by midday, the chest pains and shortness of breath couldn't be ignored. Alone in his house, panic rose, something he hadn't felt since his combat days. Struggling to stay calm, John managed to call 911, and within minutes, an ambulance whisked him to the nearest hospital. What he didn't expect was the steady stream of visitors that followed. By the time John woke from his procedure, a mild heart attack that, thankfully, the doctors caught early, Mac was already in the room, sitting in a chair by the window, helmet at his feet. "Took a little detour on the road to recovery, huh?" Mac said with a grin. John, groggy and emotional, couldn't help but laugh. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Are you kidding?" Mac replied. "The guys are all waiting downstairs. You didn't think we'd let you face this alone, did you?" True to his word, every day of John's hospital stay, at least one or two bikers showed up, bringing magazines, cracking jokes, keeping him company when the silence of the hospital room grew too heavy. They coordinated with nurses, made sure Duke was being cared for at home, and even handled a few repairs on John's old pickup without being asked. For John, who had grown so used to handling everything on his own, the wave of support was overwhelming, in the best possible way. It was loyalty in action, the kind of brotherhood he'd only ever known in combat and had never expected to find again. When he was finally discharged, the entire group was there to pick him up, bikes revving and ready, forming a slow-moving escort that guided John safely home. Back at his house, Mac helped him inside, patting his shoulder. "We've got your back, John. Always." John, holding back tears, managed a quiet, "Thank you." In the days that followed, John reflected on what had happened. The heart attack had been a wake-up call in more ways than one, not just about health, but about the depth of connection he now had. He realized that the walls he'd built, the solitude he'd convinced himself was just his nature, had been chipped away by something far more powerful than he could have imagined: friendship, loyalty, and genuine care. And for the first time in decades, John didn't feel alone, not even a little. He wasn't just part of a group of bikers. He was part of a brotherhood. Spring arrived with a gentle thaw, melting the snow and bringing back the familiar sound of engines rumbling to life. John stood in his driveway one morning, wiping down his Harley, breathing in the crisp air scented with new grass and blooming flowers. For the first time in years, he felt light, whole. It was more than the changing season. It was a reflection of his own transformation. Looking back, John barely recognized the man he had been just a year earlier. The days of solitude, the quiet ache of disconnection, the heavy weight of memories that once felt inescapable, those had been replaced with laughter, friendship, and a renewed sense of purpose. His once small world had expanded in ways he never thought possible. The rides resumed with full force that spring. John no longer hesitated when he heard Mac's familiar call to meet up. His gear, once dusty and forgotten, became a badge of pride, and each ride seemed to strengthen not just his bond with the group, but his own confidence and joy. One evening, after a long ride along the winding back roads, John and the group gathered around a bonfire at a local campground. They shared stories under the stars, flames flickering as laughter echoed into the night. Mac raised a toast, lifting a can of soda high. "To John," he said with a grin, "for reminding us all that it's never too late to find your place." The group cheered, clinking cans and bottles, and John, feeling a flush of humility and pride, lifted his own. "I should be the one thanking you," he replied, voice steady and full of emotion. "You guys gave me back something I thought was gone forever." It wasn't just the sense of belonging. It was the rediscovery of himself. For years, John had defined his life by what he had lost: friends, opportunities, time. But now, he saw his journey differently. Every mile on the road, every shared joke, every challenge faced together reminded him that life still had so much to offer. His neighbors noticed the change too. John smiled more. He lingered longer in conversations. He offered to help with projects around town, fixing fences, volunteering at the community center, even mentoring a younger veteran who was struggling to adjust to civilian life. One afternoon, as he relaxed on his porch, Duke resting at his feet, John watched a group of kids ride by on their bikes, laughing and calling to each other. He couldn't help but smile. It struck him then how far he had come. He'd gone from being a man who watched life from the sidelines to someone fully engaged, fully alive. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, as it always is, John no longer feared it. He welcomed it, because now he knew he wasn't riding it alone. As spring turned into summer, John's story began to ripple far beyond his close-knit biker group. Word of his transformation and newfound joy spread around town, inspiring people of all ages and backgrounds. The man who was once seen as the quiet, solitary veteran had become something of a local hero, a symbol of resilience, renewal, and the power of unexpected friendship. The community center invited John to speak at a gathering for veterans and their families. At first, he was hesitant. Public speaking had never been his thing, and he wasn't sure what he could offer that would matter. But Mac, ever the motivator, gave him a nudge. "Your story does matter, John. You have no idea who you might inspire." So, on a warm June evening, John stood before a small crowd in the community hall, his leather vest over a crisp shirt, the biker patch gleaming under the lights. He shared his journey openly, the long years of solitude, the deep scars of war, and the unexpected gift of brotherhood that had changed everything. As he spoke, he saw nods of understanding, a few tears, and, most importantly, faces that lit up with hope. Afterward, several people approached him: an elderly widow who had been feeling lost after her husband's passing, a young veteran grappling with the weight of PTSD, and even a local teenager who admitted he'd been feeling disconnected and unsure of his place in the world. Each of them thanked John for his honesty and his example. The biker group rallied around John's new role in the community. Together, they organized charity rides to raise funds for veterans' causes and local shelters. They hosted barbecues and invited anyone who felt alone to join them, ensuring that no one in their town would feel forgotten or left behind. John found deep fulfillment in these new roles. For so long, he had thought his best days were behind him, but now he was living proof that new purpose can emerge at any stage of life. One afternoon, Lily, Mac's daughter, handed John a photo she'd taken during one of their rides. It showed John at the front of the group, the wind tugging at his jacket, eyes forward, leading the way with quiet strength. "I thought you should have this," she said with a smile. John stared at the photo, eyes misty, heart full. "Thank you," he whispered. He framed that picture and hung it in his living room, right beside his old military medals, a symbol, to him, that life's greatest victories sometimes come long after you think the fight is over. And as John continued down the road, literally and figuratively, he knew one thing for certain: his story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was only just beginning. John Miller's journey reminds us all of something deeply important. No matter how many miles you've traveled, no matter how many battles you've fought, whether on a distant battlefield or within your own heart, there is always room for new beginnings. At 70 years old, John found not only a new hobby, but an entirely new family. A brotherhood that filled the quiet spaces in his life with laughter, loyalty, and love. His days of solitude and silent endurance were replaced by the roar of engines, the warmth of shared stories, and the comfort of knowing that he no longer had to walk or ride alone. John's story isn't about motorcycles or even about finding a group of friends. It's about the universal human need to belong, to be seen, and to be valued. It's about breaking through the walls of isolation, even when those walls have been up for decades, and realizing that life still holds surprises for us, if we're willing to take the first brave step. For John, that step was as simple and as monumental as accepting an invitation and saying yes. Through his newfound brotherhood, John didn't just rediscover joy. He found purpose. He became a beacon of hope for others, proving that no matter your age or your past, connection and transformation are always possible. His journey shows that healing comes not just from looking back and making peace with the past, but from looking forward and daring to believe in what could be. If John could sit down with each of us today, I imagine he'd offer this advice. Don't let the years convince you that your story is over. Sometimes, the best chapters come when you least expect them. And so, I'll leave you with this question. What possibility have you been keeping at arm's length? What invitation, big or small, might change your story if you're brave enough to say yes? We'd love to hear your thoughts and your stories in the comments. Have you ever found unexpected friendship or purpose later in life? Or is there a dream you've been quietly holding on to, waiting for the right moment? This community is a place for you to share, to inspire, and to connect. If John's incredible journey touched your heart, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Here, we celebrate stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit, because we believe, as John's story so beautifully proves, that it's never too late to dream, and it's never too late to find your way back to belonging. Because the road is long, but no one should have to ride it alone.